What's up guys, welcome back to the channel, and today I'm back with another video. This time once again, we're going to talk about super teams and which NBA legends have played on a super team. In my personal opinion, a super team is at least 2 to 3 all-stars, with 2 of those players being MVP level players. And in this specific video, I'm going to go through 12 to 13 players and decide which of those players has played on a super team. And I want to make this very clear, just because a player played on a super team does not devalue his accomplishments or even his championships. Now with that being said, let's get into the video and look at our first NBA legend, that being Michael Jordan. So in Jordan's early career, from 85 to 89, during that time period, he had 0 all-star teammates and was definitely not on a super team. And when Scottie Pippen came, that was his one lone all-star from 1990 to 1993. And those Bulls teams would three-peat, but still at that point, they were not a super team, just a very, very good team, being led by the greatest player of all time. Now looking at Jordan's second run with the Bulls, this time he would have a big three, that being with Dennis Rodman, and once again, Scottie Pippen. And this Bulls team was a very good team, very well coached, and they had extremely good talent. But I would not call them a super team. At this point, Rodman, he was 34 years old, he was not an all-star, or even all-NBA player. He was still a great defensive player, a great rebounder, but at this point, he was a one-way player and mainly a specialist when it came to defense and rebounding. And I don't want to downplay the 96 Bulls, as once again they had great players and great depth, guys like Tony Kukoc, Steve Kerr, as well as Ron Harper. But with that being said, this Bulls team was pretty close to a super team, but overall, it was once again a collection of very good players, being led by the greatest player of all time. In 97-98, this Bulls team, they were the oldest team in the NBA, and Rodman and Pippen, during this time period, had major injuries and weren't the same players they were in their prime. So in summary, Jordan's career played on some very good teams, had some very good teammates, but he never played on a true super team throughout his entire career. Now moving on from Jordan, next up we have LeBron James. LeBron, very similar to Jordan, in the first half of his career, didn't have much help in Cleveland. But in 2011, that all changed as LeBron took his talent to South Beach, teaming up with D-Wade as well as Chris Bosh. And from 2011 to 2013, this Heat team was very much a super team. You had D-Wade, a top 5 to 10 player in the NBA, and Chris Bosh, a top 15 to 20 player. And both those guys were all-stars every single year. So LeBron during those 3 years was definitely on a super team, and even look at the Cavaliers as well as the Lakers in 2017. Once again, he had Kevin Love and Kyrie Irving, 2 all-star caliber players, and now in 2022, he has Anthony Davis as well as Russell Westbrook with a ton of other great role players and great shooters. And whether you think those teams are super teams is besides the point, because LeBron in his career undoubtedly played on at least 1 super team, possibly 2 or even 3. Now next up, we have one of LeBron's big rivals, that being Kobe Bryant. Kobe in his early career definitely not playing a super team. From 97 to 03, he had some great talent. He had Shaq, of course, as well as Eddie Jones and Nick Van Exel, but those Lakers teams for the most part were a 2-man duo of Shaq and Kobe, and they won 3 championships because of their individual greatness. And when looking at the Shaq and Kobe era, the only time you could argue they played on a super team was the 04 Lakers, but even that team, I would argue, was not a true super team. At that time, you had Shaq, of course, who was fat and out of shape, you had a prime Kobe, you had 40-year-old Karl Malone and a 35-year-old Gary Payton. Those 2 guys who were not in their primes. So when it comes to the 04 Lakers, they're kind of deceiving. They have superstar name value, but in terms of overall talent and skill at this point, that team was not a super team due to Gary Payton and Karl Malone not being in their prime. Now during the mid-2000s, Kobe virtually had no help, so we'll skip over that. Looking at 08 to 2012. Where once again Kobe was paired up with another all-star, that being Pau Gasol. But once again this Lakers team was mainly a duo of Kobe and Pau. They had great role players like Lamar Odom, Metta World Peace, as well as Derek Fisher, but the 08-2012 Lakers, in my personal opinion, were not a super team. They were just a very well-run team that was put together by great management. Now the last time Kobe in his career played on a real contender was in 2013. In the 2013 Lakers, very similar to the 04 Lakers, had superstar name value. Of course, you had Kobe, you had Dwight Howard, Pau Gasol, and Steve Nash. And purely going off name value, that team would easily be a super team. But when you add the context that Dwight Howard had a severe back injury, Pau Gasol didn't have his best year, and Steve Nash was 38 years old and missed significant time, and this Lakers team is a borderline super team, but they didn't live up to the expectations. So when looking at Kobe's entire career, there's only one season in 2013 where you could argue he played in a super team, and that 2013 Lakers is suspect at best for being called a super team. Now next up, let's look at two Laker legends that have been Magic Johnson as well as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And unlike the first three players, it's not really debatable. These two guys 100% played in a super team and multiple super teams at that. But to prove my point, let's look at the 87 Lakers. This team had Kareem, who was an all-star. They had Magic Johnson, also an all-star, an MVP. They had James Worthy, an all-star. Michael Cooper, the Defensive Player of the Year. Byron Scott, a 17-point per game scorer. AC Green, as well as Michael Thompson. That Lakers team was absolutely stacked, and they went 7 men deep. So in talking about Magic and Kareem, they definitely played on multiple super teams, mainly because those two players are both top 10 players, combined with James Worthy, who's top 50, as well as someone like Michael Cooper, who's one of the best perimeter defenders of all time. Now moving on, let's look at Larry Bird, their big-time rival. And Larry, just like them, also played in a super team in the Big Three era that was the 1980s. And when talking about super teams, I would look to the 86 Celtics, as they were once again absolutely loaded. You had Larry Bird, the MVP, Kevin McHale, an all-star, Robert Parrish, an all-star, Dennis Johnson, all-defensive second team, Bill Walton, the sixth man of the year, and Danny Ainge, who averaged 12 points per game. That roster also is very much stacked, and Larry Bird had tons of help from the 86 Celtics. And you could also argue the 84 Celtics, the 85 Celtics, and the 87 Celtics were also super teams for the 1980s. Now looking ahead, next up, we have Hakeem Olajuwon. And Hakeem, out of this whole list, I personally think played with the least help out of any superstar player. And through the first decade of his career, he virtually had no help outside of Ralph Sampson, who was injured basically every year. In 94 as well as 95, I think Hakeem had the two toughest championships in NBA history, as his supporting cast featured no All-Stars or All-NBA players. And the only time Hakeem, you could argue, played in a super team was the 97 Rockets. On that team, we had Hakeem, who was 34 years old, Clyde Drexler, also 34, and Charles Barkley, who was 33. But once again, a theme of this video, very similar to the 2013 Lakers as well as the 04 Lakers, these guys were not in their prime. They were very close to it, but they weren't the same players they were at their absolute peak. And Barkley and Drexler combined this year missed 50 games. So in terms of name value on a stat sheet, this team was definitely a super team. We're looking at how they played in the context. The 97 Rockets were 100% not a super team. And the same thing we said 2 years later with the 99 Rockets, as once again this team had Hakeem and Barkley, and they added Scottie Pippen, who was 33 years old. And this Rockets team once again was not a super team, but they had superstar name value. And we're looking at Hakeem's entire career, him not having much teammate help is one of the big arguments for him being the best center of all time, and having the 2 best playoff runs in NBA history. Now next up, we have another big man who played in Texas, that being Tim Duncan. And in Duncan's career, he had his fair share of help, but individually, when we look at his championship teams, at no point did he have a true super team. In 99, he had David Robinson, his lone all-star. In 03, he had no all-star, he had a 20-year-old Tony Parker, a rookie Manu, and a 37-year-old Robinson. In 05, Manu Ginobili was his lone all-star teammate. In 07, the only all-star he had was Tony Parker. And in 2014, he had 0 all-star teammates. When talking about the Spurs and Duncan, one of the main problems people do is they don't provide context to Duncan's teams. They simply look at the names and assume he played on a stacked super team. But the context shows you guys, those Spurs teams were at very different points in their careers. And we're looking at 2014, what many people call the best Spurs team of all time. That team still was not a super team. You had Tim Duncan, who was 37, Manu Ginobili was 36, Tony Parker was 31, and Kawhi Leonard, who was 22. And you could very well argue all 4 of those players were not in their prime for the Spurs team, which once again proves you can have an all-time great team and still not be a super team. And in Duncan's career, I believe he never once played on a true super team. Now moving on, next up, we have Steph Curry and Kevin Durant. And once again, this is pretty straightforward, as these 2 players 100% played in a super team, that being the 2017, 2018, as well as 2019 Warriors. And looking at 2017, you had Steph and KD, who were all-stars, as well as Clay and Draymond, who were also all-stars. So in this Warriors team, we had 4 all-star caliber players, you had two of the best shooters in the NBA and the best scorer in the league, combined with one of the best defenders. And the 2017 Warriors undoubtedly are a super team and one of the most overpowered teams in NBA history, and they literally almost broke the NBA and NBA fan spirits. Now last on this list, we once again make a very easy choice, that being Bill Russell, who very similar to KD and Steph, also played in a super team. Now one example I'll give is the 1967 Boston Celtics. On this team, we had Sam Jones, John Havlicek, as well as Bailey Howe. All three guys were all-stars and averaged over 20 points per game. We also had Bill Russell, who was an all-star and finished third in MVP voting. So this Boston team had 4 all-star players and arguably the best player in the league. And when looking at Russell's career, let's make it simple and just flat out say it, and just say Bill Russell played on multiple super teams. Now that right there was our last NBA legend, and that was roughly the top 15 players in NBA history and whether they played on a super team or not. And as I said in the beginning, just because a player played on a super team does not devalue their championships or their overall accolades. I just think it's a pretty interesting discussion to see which players had the most help out of their entire careers. So with that being said, let me know your guys' thoughts. Who do you think played on a super team? Do you think I got one of these wrong? Let me know your guys' thoughts in the comments, and as always, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you guys next time.